Okay, so today we are looking at a recipe to make a basic kind of Victoria sandwich cake. It's a basic sponge cake mixture, so I'm going to do it as a sandwich cake today. So I have a set of sandwich tins here that I'm going to use. The exact same recipe could be used for doing little fairy cakes. So I've got these kind of reusable silicone fairy cake molds, or if you were using the paper ones, you just need a fairy cake tin to line if you were doing fairy cakes. The recipe that I'm going to do today makes about 24 fairy cakes or else one sandwich cake. So to prepare my sandwich tins, I have a piece of greaseproof paper here. So I've cut this off of my roll and I've just folded it in half so that I can line my base of my two tins. And I'm just going to pop it on top and I'm going to draw around it with my scissors very carefully. Some people do this with a pencil, but you risk getting the pencil mark on your cake then if you don't put the paper the right way around. So I am actually just going to very carefully just use the point of my scissors to score my paper the whole way around. And then holding the two layers together, I can just about see the outline of my tin where I marked it. I'm going to just cut it with my scissors then. So I then have my two circles for the bottom of my tin with as little waste as possible. It's one thing with greaseproof paper, we don't want to be wasting it. And then to prepare my tins, I just have a sheet of margarine wrapper left over that I had in the fridge from the last time I was baking. I'm just going to grease the edges of the tins with it, so just the sides. And then I'm going to pop my greaseproof paper in, and if it's a little bit too big, it doesn't matter if it goes up the sides a little bit. So that's what your tin should look like, ready to go. So the recipe that we are going to do today is a creaming method recipe. So that means that we are going to start off with our fat and our sugar. So our margarine or our butter, I'm using margarine today, and our sugar, I'm going to cream them together. This recipe is my mom's cake recipe, so I'm afraid it is actually in pounds and ounces. I will put the grams in the description as well. So it's 6 ounces of butter or margarine and 6 ounces of sugar to start with. Okay, so in on top of my margarine, I'm going to weigh my sugar straight in. Again, do it nice and slowly if you're weighing into your mixing bowl. If you're not comfortable doing that, just use a separate bowl to weigh each ingredient into and then add it into your mix. So it's 6 ounces of sugar as well. And I am going to use an electric mixer to beat these together. If you don't have an electric mixer, you can do it with a wooden spoon, absolutely. It'll just take a few extra minutes, a little bit of hard work. When you're making a sponge cake, this is the part that you can kind of beat as much as possible. When you start adding your flour and your egg, you don't want to beat it as much. So really give it a really good mix, really good beating until it's gone completely soft and creamy at this stage. Okay, so I have mixed my margarine and sugar until it is soft there. Took about 3 or 4 minutes. If you were using margarine straight from the, or butter straight from the fridge, it might take a little bit longer. And another trick with when you're doing this as well is you might need to stop your mixer if you're using like a stand mixer like the one I have, and actually scrape down the sides of the bowl a couple of times and then mix again. The last thing I'm going to do now before I start adding my eggs and my flour is I'm going to add my vanilla essence to this and just give it one last mix so that it's completely mixed through it. So it's about a teaspoonful of vanilla essence. Be careful when you're buying vanilla essence because some of them are actually kind of sugar syrups flavoured with vanilla as opposed to pure vanilla essence. Now the pure vanilla essence is more expensive, but you need less of it to get as strong a flavour, so it kind of lasts a little bit longer. So I'm going to mix that in and then I will start to add my flour and eggs. Okay, so the next couple of things that I am going to add to this is my flour and my eggs. If you are doing this in a stand mixer like mine, you can add it all in one go. If you're doing it by hand, or even if you're doing it in kind of a small handheld electric mixer, you might want to add it in 2 or 3 kind of additions. So it's 8 ounces of flour, I'm using plain flour and I'm going to add baking powder. If you're using self-raising flour, then you don't need to add the baking powder as well. I tend to stick with plain flour because I find sometimes the raising agent in the self-raising flour goes off. So if you leave it there for quite a long time, it might not work as well. Whereas with the plain flour, you can always add the baking powder to it anyway. So 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder. Only just about enough left in this. One. I'll just about get it. Yeah, so 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder. I find that baking powder the best, the royal baking powder, if you can get it. Because it's in a tin as well, it lasts a little bit longer. So I'm going to sieve that in and then I'm going to add my eggs. So to my mixture, I'm adding 3 large eggs. If you're using kind of small or medium eggs, you might need to add a dash of milk. I wouldn't necessarily add a full 4th egg because it'd probably be too much, but a dash of milk will stretch it out for you if you have smaller eggs. Now, with this mixture, so once you've added liquid to your baking powder, it activates it. So this is kind of when you want to work to get your cake in the oven as quick as possible. So this is why it's so important to have your oven preheated. So we're at 180 degrees for this recipe. And the other thing as well is we want to beat much more gently now. So you can see I've added my 3 eggs straight into my mixture there. Again, if you're not the best at cracking eggs, crack them into a dish or a plate before you add them to your mixture so you can fish out any bits of shell if you need to. When you start to beat this, if you've added all your flour and your eggs on a very low speed, because the flour will puff a little bit, and also you don't want to overbeat it at this stage. So once your mixture has come together and is completely combined, stop mixing at that stage. Don't be tempted to keep going. Okay, so there is my cake mixture there all combined. When you are making any kind of a cake mixture, a spatula is always your best friend. So try and scrape everything down as best you can. I probably should have mentioned this at the start as well. I am using this shape mixer. So if you have like a Kenwood stand mixer, it's the one with the K in the middle of it. It's a K mix. That's kind of what this design is based on. If you're using a handheld electric mixer, then you'd use the kind of balloon shaped whisks for this cake. So I'm going to divide my mixture. If you've got any kids in the house, I'm sure you could get help to finish cleaning that off. So I'm going to divide my mixture into my 2 tins, and then it's going into an preheated oven at 180 degrees, as I already said, for probably about 20 minutes for the sandwich tins. If you are making this into fairy cakes, really handy trick to divide the mixture into the fairy cake tins is an ice cream scoop. So one of the ones with like a flick on it to release the mixture. Probably not necessarily a full ice cream scoop into each fairy cake, but it's just a very quick way of doing it. If you don't have an ice cream scoop, then 2 spoons, and just use the back of 1 spoon to push the mixture off the other. So when I'm doing sandwich cakes, I tend to, as you can see here, flatten it out with a little dip in the middle, because as it starts to rise, it will rise in the middle. So just try and keep it flat. I'm just going to finish scraping out my bowl now, and they are ready to go into the oven. So scrape every last little bit of mixture out of the bowl. Don't waste any of it. Okay, so I have just taken my cakes out of the oven there. They took about 20 minutes in the end. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier on is, depending on your oven, you might need to move them around. So either twist them around after about 15 minutes. You can kind of maybe see it a bit more clearly on this one. You can see it's a bit paler on one side than the other. Another thing I want to discuss then is, how do you know when a sponge cake is ready? So It's hard to see along the edges here because the tin is brown as well, but the cake has actually started to pull away from the edges of the tin, so that's a really good indicator. We're looking for a lovely golden brown colour, which we have here as well, and it should spring back when pressed gently. So you can see there, I'm not leaving like a fingerprint behind. So that's what you're looking for with a sponge cake. There's no need to test it with a skewer. I know a lot of people tend to. So the first thing you want to do when your cake is out of the oven is take it out of the tin. And that is just to prevent it from getting soggy from any condensation that might be in it. So just take them out of the tin and let them cool on a wire cooling rack. Okay, so my cake has cooled completely at this stage. I am going to sandwich mine with some jam and some buttercream. You could sandwich it with fresh cream as well. You could put some fresh fruit in there too if you wanted. So I am just going to pop my jam onto this side here. This is homemade strawberry jam. I actually made it using frozen strawberries that I picked up in Lidl or Aldi, and they worked just fine, and they're all pre-prepared as well, so it's really quick to make. So if you wanted to have a go at making your own. And then I am going to put my buttercream on the other side. So it's up to you how much you like of each in the middle. So as you can see, I am spreading one onto each layer. And just before you sandwich your cake, have a look and make sure you've decided which bit you want as the top of your cake and which bit you want as the bottom. So try and pick the flatter topped one to make the base of your cake. A little bit more in the middle there. And then carefully flip that on top. Now you can leave it at that, dust it with a little bit of icing sugar, or you can decorate the top, so you could pipe some buttercream on top, you could put some fresh fruit on top, whatever you want.